Good evening, friends, and welcome back to another gentle journey through the quieter corners of history. Tonight, we'll drift into the fascinating world of medieval superstitions, those strange beliefs and practices that our ancestors held so dear, yet often dismissed by modern minds as mere foolishness. But as you settle under your blanket and dim your lights, let me share a secret with you. Many of these so-called superstitions actually made perfect sense. Picture yourself by a warm fireplace, the soft crackle of burning wood filling the air. As we explore 5 peculiar beliefs from the Middle Ages that, when you really think about it, were surprisingly logical responses to the challenges of their time. These weren't just random fears or meaningless rituals. They were clever solutions, wrapped in the language of magic and mystery. So find your most comfortable position. Perhaps adjust that pillow just right, and let your breathing slow as we embark on this soothing exploration. And if this calm journey helps you unwind tonight, feel free to tap that like button and subscribe only if it feels right. Of course, there's no pressure here, just the gentle rhythm of stories waiting to be told. Tonight's journey will take us through 6 chapters, each revealing a different facet of medieval wisdom disguised as superstition. We'll discover why people threw salt over their shoulders, why they feared eating with one foot bare, and why they believed in the protective power of iron. Each tale will unfold slowly, like smoke curling from a dying ember, carrying you deeper into that peaceful state where learning feels like dreaming. Let me tell you about Margaret, a young woman living in a small English village in the year 1347. Picture her in your mind's eye, auburn hair braided simply, hands roughened by daily work, moving carefully through her modest kitchen as the evening light fades through her single window. The soft glow of a tallow candle flickers across wooden shelves lined with precious provisions, and among them sits a small clay pot containing what might be her family's most valuable possession, salt. You see, friends, Margaret lives in a world where salt isn't something you mindlessly shake onto your dinner. In medieval Europe, salt was literally worth its weight in silver. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That's where we get the word salary. And by Margaret's time, this white crystal had become a symbol of prosperity, preservation, and protection, all rolled into one precious commodity. Now, imagine Margaret preparing the evening meal, her movements deliberate and practiced. She reaches for that clay pot, measures out just the smallest pinch of salt. Every grain counts, and, as she does so, a few crystals slip from her fingers and scatter across the rough wooden table. In our modern world, you might simply brush those crystals aside without a second thought, but Margaret immediately throws a pinch over her left shoulder, whispering a quiet prayer as she does. Why, you might wonder, as you sink deeper into your comfortable position. Why this seemingly strange ritual that has survived even into our modern era? The answer lies in the incredible value of that spilled salt and the very real dangers that surrounded medieval life like shadows in the night. My sleepy friends was the medieval world's refrigerator, medicine cabinet, and currency all wrapped into one. Without refrigeration, salt was the only way to preserve meat through the long winter months. Imagine the terror of watching your family's protein source spoil because you hadn't salted it properly. Imagine the desperation of having no salt left to preserve the pig you'd slaughtered for winter, knowing that without it, Your family might not survive until spring. But salt's power went far beyond preservation. Medieval people understood, perhaps more intuitively than we do today, that salt had genuine medicinal properties. They used it to clean wounds, and they were absolutely right to do so. Salt creates an environment hostile to bacteria, helping prevent the infections that could so easily claim a life in an age before antibiotics. When someone in Margaret's village suffered a cut or scrape, salt water was their first defense against the invisible killers we now know as germs. So when Margaret spills salt, she's not just losing a seasoning, she's watching a small fortune scatter across her table. In a world where the difference between having salt and not having salt could mean the difference between life and death, that spilled salt represented lost protection, lost preservation, lost prosperity. The anxiety that must have filled her chest at that moment would be very real, very justified. But here's where the beauty of the superstition reveals itself, like dawn breaking over a misty meadow. By throwing salt over her left shoulder, Margaret wasn't just performing a meaningless ritual. She was engaging in what we might call medieval psychology, a way of processing and releasing the very real anxiety that came with waste in a world where waste could be deadly. The left shoulder, according to medieval belief, was where evil spirits gathered the side of misfortune and negativity. By throwing salt over that shoulder, Margaret was symbolically feeding those spirits, appeasing them, sending them away satisfied so they wouldn't bring further bad luck to compound her loss. But more than that, she was giving herself permission to let go of the anxiety about the spilled salt and move forward. Think about it as you rest there in the comfort of your bed. Margaret couldn't change the fact that she'd spilled the salt. She couldn't magically return those precious crystals to her pot, but she could perform an action that helped her psychologically release the stress of that loss and refocus on the task at hand. The ritual served as a mental reset button, a way to transform paralyzing anxiety into purposeful action. And there's another layer to this wisdom, one that reveals just how sophisticated medieval thinking could be. Salt was believed to create barriers against evil because, in many ways, it actually did. We've already talked about its antibacterial properties, but medieval people also noticed that salt could stop the growth of mold and fungus. They saw how it could preserve not just meat, but wood and other organic materials. To them, salt was literally a substance that fought against decay and corruption. When they threw salt over their shoulder, they were symbolically creating a barrier between themselves and the forces of decaying. In a very real sense, they were right. The salt would hit the floor behind them, creating what they believed was a protective circle. While we know that a few grains of salt on a dirt floor won't actually stop evil spirits, the confidence and sense of protection it gave them had real psychological benefits. Imagine Margaret finishing her meal preparations, the candle flame dancing gently in the evening breeze that seeps through the gaps in her wooden walls. The salt ritual has calmed her nerves, allowed her to refocus, and she moves through the rest of her tasks with the steady confidence of someone who has taken action against misfortune. Her family will eat well tonight. The preserved meat will last through winter, and she has performed the small magic that keeps chaos at bay. This is the genius of medieval superstition, friends. These weren't ignorant people stumbling through a dark world. They were intelligent, humans creating practical solutions to very real problems. The salt-throwing ritual was simultaneously a waste prevention reminder, an anxiety management technique, and a confidence-building exercise, all wrapped in the comforting language of tradition and spirituality. As we drift toward our next chapter, picture yourself in that medieval kitchen with Margaret. Feel the rough texture of the wooden table under your fingertips. Smell the smoky sweetness of the tallow candle. Hear the gentle whisper of wind through the thatched roof above. In this world where every resource was precious and every day brought new challenges, the Salt Guardian's wisdom helped people navigate not just the physical dangers of their time, but the emotional and psychological ones as well. The candle burns lower now, casting longer shadows across the room as Margaret sets aside her work for the evening. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to waste or preserve, new moments where the ancient wisdom of her ancestors will guide her through. But tonight, protected by salt and tradition, she can rest peacefully, knowing she has honored both the practical and mystical forces that shape her world. The morning mist clings to the cobblestones as we follow Thomas, a blacksmith in the year 1284, through the winding streets of a French village. Listen to the gentle rhythm of his footsteps echoing off the stone walls, the soft jingle of iron tools in his leather satchel, the distant sound of church bells marking the start of another day. Thomas carries with him not just the tools of his trade, but a collection of small iron trinkets, a horseshoe nail in his pocket, an iron ring on his finger, a small iron cross hanging from his neck. To our modern eyes, Thomas might seem like a man obsessed with his profession, unable to leave his work behind even for a simple walk through town. But settle deeper into your comfort tonight, dear listeners, because Thomas's iron collection serves a purpose far more sophisticated than mere occupational pride. In the medieval world, iron wasn't just a useful metal, it was a shield against dangers both seen and unseen. And the science behind this belief would surprise you. Picture Thomas stopping at the village well, the cool morning air carrying the scent of baking bread from nearby homes. As he draws water, his iron ring catches the early sunlight, and an elderly woman approaches with her own bucket. She notices his iron trinkets and nods approvingly, showing him a small iron nail she keeps tucked in her shoe. They exchange knowing smiles, fellow practitioners of an ancient wisdom that understood something our modern world has largely forgotten. Iron, you see, possesses remarkable properties that medieval people observed and utilized long before scientists could explain why. As you rest there in your bed, imagine the world as Thomas knows it, a place where mysterious illnesses could strike without warning, where food could spoil overnight, where invisible forces seemed to attack the very essence of life itself. In such a world, iron's unique characteristics made it genuinely protective in ways that seem almost magical. Let me tell you about the connection between iron and health, a relationship that medieval people understood instinctively. Thomas, like many people of his time, suffered from what they called the weakness, what we now know as iron deficiency anemia. This condition was incredibly common in medieval Europe, where diets were often limited and the bioavailable iron in food wasn't always sufficient for optimal health. But Thomas had an advantage over many of his contemporaries. Working with iron every day, handling it, breathing in tiny particles as he hammered and shaped it, even occasionally absorbing small amounts through his skin. He was inadvertently treating his iron deficiency. The blacksmiths of medieval Europe were often among the healthiest members of their communities. And while they attributed this to iron's magical protective properties, we now understand it was partly due to their increased iron exposure. The iron trinkets Thomas carries serve multiple purposes. That ring on his finger isn't just decoration. In a world where cuts and scrapes were daily occurrences, iron's natural antimicrobial properties provided real protection. Iron creates an environment hostile to many harmful bacteria, and medieval people noticed that wounds seemed to heal better when iron was present. They didn't understand the science, but they observed the results. Consider the horseshoe nail in Thomas's pocket. Horseshoes themselves were considered incredibly lucky and protective, but the reason goes beyond superstition. Horses were valuable animals, essential for transportation, farming, and warfare. A horse with properly fitted iron shoes could travel longer distances, work harder, and remain healthier than one without. The iron shoes protected the horse's hooves from wear and infection, keeping these vital animals strong and reliable. When medieval people began associating iron horseshoes with good luck and protection, they were recognizing a genuine pattern. People who took care of their horses with iron shoes tended to be more prosperous and successful. The luck was really the result of better horse care, leading to better transportation, more efficient farming, and greater mobility in trade and warfare. But let's explore another dimension of iron's protective power, one that reveals the sophisticated thinking behind medieval superstitions. Iron was believed to ward off fairies and evil spirits, and this belief had roots in observable phenomena that medieval people couldn't fully explain but could definitely experience. Imagine Thomas working late into the evening, the glow of his forge casting dancing shadows on the walls of his workshop. The air shimmers with heat, and the rhythmic hammering of iron on iron creates a hypnotic soundtrack. Medieval people noticed that certain areas seemed to have fewer problems with spoiled food, unexplained illnesses, or mysterious accidents. Often, these were areas where ironworking took place. We now understand that the heat and smoke from forges, combined with the iron particles in the air, created environments that were naturally hostile to many harmful microorganisms. The electromagnetic properties of iron also affected the behavior of certain insects and small animals. Medieval people interpreted the absence of pests and the improved health around forges as evidence of iron's power to repel evil forces. The iron cross hanging from Thomas's neck represents another layer of this wisdom. In a world where wound infections could be deadly, having a small piece of iron close to the body provided a ready source of treatment. Medieval people would sometimes scrape iron filings into wounds or infected areas, and while this sounds barbaric to us, iron's antimicrobial properties often made such treatments effective. As the evening deepens and Thomas makes his way home, his iron trinkets catching the last rays of sunlight, we can see how his superstitious practices were actually a sophisticated system of health, maintenance, and risk management. The iron in his daily life helped prevent anemia, provided wound care, created antimicrobial environments, and even influenced his diet through cooking in iron pots and pans. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the iron superstition is how it encouraged people to value and maintain contact with this essential element. In a world where iron deficiency was widespread and dangerous, believing that iron trinkets provided protection encouraged behaviors that genuinely improved health and well-being. Picture Thomas settling into his humble home as night falls, the day's work complete. His wife greets him at the door, and she too wears a small iron pendant. Their cooking pot is iron, their tools are iron, their very livelihood depends on this remarkable metal. They live surrounded by iron not just because of their profession, but because generations of ancestors discovered that iron-rich environments were healthier, safer, more prosperous places to be. The gentle hiss of the dying forge outside lies. They don't understand the biochemistry of iron absorption or the antimicrobial properties of ferrous metals, but they've inherited something perhaps more valuable. A practical wisdom that keeps them healthy and protected through the simple act of carrying iron close to their bodies and working with it in their daily lives. As we leave Thomas to his peaceful rest, iron trinkets safely nearby, we can appreciate how medieval superstition served as a delivery system for essential health practices. The belief in iron's magical properties ensured that people maintained contact with this vital element, creating better health outcomes through what appeared to be purely spiritual practices. The soft sounds of the sleeping village fade as we prepare to explore our next chapter, carrying with us the understanding that sometimes the most practical wisdom comes disguised as magic, and sometimes the most powerful protection comes from the simplest belief in the healing power of the earth's own elements. Dawn breaks slowly over a medieval village as we meet Eleanor, a merchant's wife living in the year 1298. The golden light filters through her shuttered windows as she begins her morning routine. But notice how she moves as she prepares to step outside her door. She pauses at the threshold, looking down at her feet with the careful attention of someone performing a ritual passed down through generations. Eleanor will not, under any circumstances, step outside her home with one foot bare. As you settle more comfortably into your resting place tonight, let me share with you the profound wisdom hidden within this seemingly peculiar superstition. In Eleanor's world, the threshold of a home wasn't just a physical boundary. It was a sacred space that marked the difference between safety and danger, between the known and the unknown, between health and illness. And her insistence on having both feet properly covered before crossing that threshold was rooted in medical knowledge that her ancestors had accumulated over centuries of careful observation. Picture Eleanor's home, a modest but well-maintained dwelling with thick stone walls and a sturdy wooden door. The threshold is made of a large, flat stone, worn smooth by countless footsteps over the years. This stone boundary isn't arbitrary, it represents the line where Eleanor's control over her environment begins and ends. Inside her home, she can control the cleanliness, the temperature, the safety of every surface. But outside lies a world filled with invisible dangers that could threaten her family's health and well-being. The superstition about bare feet and thresholds emerged from generations of observing what we now understand as basic principles of hygiene and disease prevention. In medieval times, the streets were filled with hazards that could easily enter the home through bare feet, animal waste, rotting organic matter, parasites, bacteria, and even the remnants of industrial processes like leather tanning and metalworking. Eleanor understands intuitively that her feet are potential carriers of contamination. Every step she takes outside her home exposes her to materials that could bring illness into her carefully maintained domestic space. By ensuring that both feet are properly covered before she steps out, and by performing cleansing rituals when she returns, she's practicing what we would now recognize as excellent infection control. But let's delve deeper into the specific wisdom of the both feet covered requirement. Why not just 1 foot? Why did medieval people develop such precise rules about threshold crossing? The answer reveals a sophisticated understanding of how contamination spreads and how to prevent it. Imagine Eleanor preparing to visit the market, her leather shoes carefully laced, her woolen stockings providing an additional barrier between her skin and any harmful substances she might encounter. As she steps across her threshold, both feet properly protected, she's engaging in a practice that serves multiple purposes simultaneously. First, having both feet equally protected ensures that she won't accidentally track different levels of contamination into her home. If 1 foot is bare and 1 is covered, the bare foot will pick up far more harmful material, creating an imbalance that could lead to uneven contamination patterns in her living space. Medieval people noticed that illnesses seemed to spread in unpredictable ways through homes where threshold rituals weren't properly observed. Second, the act of checking both feet before crossing the threshold serves as a mindfulness practice that helps Eleanor maintain awareness of the boundary between clean and potentially contaminated spaces. This mental preparation is crucial for maintaining the other hygiene practices that will keep her family healthy. As Eleanor walks through the village streets, observe how her covered feet interact with the environment around her. The leather soles of her shoes create a barrier between her skin and the countless microorganisms that live in the soil. The animal droppings, the food scraps, and the other organic matter that accumulates in medieval streets. Without this protection, her bare feet would become vectors for transporting these materials directly into her home. But the wisdom goes even deeper. Medieval people understood that certain illnesses seemed to enter homes through the feet of family members. What they were observing were parasitic infections, bacterial contaminations, and fungal problems that could indeed be transmitted through bare feet walking on contaminated surfaces. The threshold superstition was their way of creating a systematic approach to preventing these transmission routes. Consider the ritual that Eleanor will perform when she returns home. She'll stop at her threshold, carefully clean her shoes on the rough stone, and sometimes even wash her feet before entering her living space. This isn't just spiritual practice, it's practical medicine disguised as religious observance. The psychological benefits of threshold rituals were equally important. In a world filled with uncertainty and invisible dangers, having a clear, actionable way to protect one's home and family provided enormous comfort and sense of control. Eleanor's careful attention to her feet and her threshold gives her confidence that she's doing everything possible to keep her loved ones safe. Picture Eleanor at the market now, her covered feet carrying her safely through the bustling crowd. She negotiates with vendors, examines goods, moves through spaces where hundreds of other people have walked, All around her, organic matter decomposes, animals leave waste, and countless microorganisms thrive in the warm, moist environment created by human activity. But her feet remain protected, insulated from direct contact with these potential sources of illness. The medieval understanding of miasma, the belief that diseases were carried in bad air and corrupted environments, actually contained important truths about disease transmission. While they didn't understand germ theory, medieval people correctly identified that illness often seemed to originate in dirty, crowded, poorly ventilated spaces. The threshold superstition was part of a larger system of beliefs designed to prevent the spread of illness from these dangerous public spaces into the safety of the home. As the day progresses and Eleanor completes her errands, her shoes have accumulated a collection of materials from the outside world: dust, organic particles, moisture, and countless microorganisms now cling to the leather and fabric. When she approaches her threshold for the return journey, she's carrying with her a sample of everything she's encountered during her day in the public spaces of her village. The ritual cleansing that takes place at the threshold serves as a decontamination process. Eleanor scrapes her shoes, brushes off visible dirt, and sometimes even changes into clean indoor footwear. She's creating a barrier between the outside world and her home environment, reducing the likelihood that whatever she's picked up during her travels will establish itself in her living space. As evening falls and Eleanor settles into her home, both feet clean and properly cared for, she can rest with the satisfaction of knowing she's followed the wisdom of her ancestors. The threshold has served its purpose as a guardian of her family's health, and the simple act of ensuring both feet were properly covered has protected her from countless invisible dangers. The soft sounds of her evening routine, the gentle splash of water as she washes, the quiet rustle of clean clothing, the peaceful crackle of the fire in her hearth. Eleanor's day has been successful, not just in terms of the errands she completed, but in terms of the health risks she avoided through careful attention to the boundary between public and private space. As we prepare to continue our journey through medieval wisdom, take a moment to appreciate how the threshold guardian's logic transformed simple awareness of contamination into a sustainable system of protection. Eleanor's ancestors didn't need to understand microbiology to develop effective practices for preventing the spread of illness. They simply needed to observe, remember, and pass down the knowledge that proper foot protection and threshold rituals kept families healthier. The gentle rhythm of Eleanor's breathing as she settles into sleep provides our soundtrack as we transition to our next exploration of medieval wisdom, carrying with us the understanding that sometimes the most practical health advice comes wrapped in the language of superstition and tradition. The afternoon light filters through heavy clouds as we encounter William, a wealthy merchant in the year 1356, standing before a polished metal mirror in his well-appointed chamber. But something is wrong with this scene. William's face is pale, his eyes unfocused, and his breathing is shallow and rapid. His wife, Catherine, rushes to his side with a piece of dark cloth, and with urgent but practiced movements, she covers the mirror completely, whispering prayers as she does so. William, she believes, is in mortal danger, and the mirror might steal what remains of his weakening soul. As you rest there in the comfort, Let me guide you into the sophisticated medical thinking that lay beneath this seemingly irrational fear of mirrors and reflective surfaces. In medieval Europe, the belief that mirrors could trap or steal souls wasn't just superstitious nonsense. It was the result of careful observation about human health and the connection between self-perception and physical well-being. Picture William's chamber, furnished with the luxury that his successful trading ventures have afforded. Tapestries hang from the walls, candles provide warm light, and in the corner stands his most prized possession, a mirror made of polished bronze, imported at great expense from craftsmen in Venice. This mirror is not just a tool for grooming. It's a symbol of status, a marvel of medieval technology, and, as Catherine believes, a potential threat to her husband's very existence. William has been battling what medieval physicians called the wasting sickness, a condition we might now recognize as severe depression combined with physical illness. For weeks, he has been losing weight, sleeping poorly, and showing little interest in food, business, or the activities that once brought him joy. His reflection in the bronze mirror shows a man who seems to be fading away, becoming less substantial with each passing day. Catherine's act of covering the mirror isn't born from ignorance, but from generations of accumulated wisdom about the relationship between self-image and health. Medieval people understood, perhaps more intuitively than we do today, that how a person sees themselves can have profound effects on their physical well-being. They noticed that people who spent too much time staring at their reflections when they were ill often seemed to get worse, while those who avoided mirrors during illness sometimes recovered more quickly. The logic behind the mirror superstition reveals a sophisticated understanding of what we now call psychosomatic medicine. When William looks into his mirror and sees a pale, wasted version of himself, his brain processes this visual information as confirmation of his illness and decline. This psychological reinforcement can actually worsen his physical symptoms, creating a feedback loop where seeing sickness makes him more sick. But let's explore another dimension of the mirror superstition that shows how medieval thinking connected physical objects with health outcomes. Mirrors in William's time were made from polished metals, primarily bronze, silver, or steel. These materials had to be kept extremely clean and well maintained to provide clear reflections, and the process of creating and maintaining them involved techniques that medieval people associated with both beauty and danger. Picture the craftsman who created William's mirror, working with toxic mercury compounds to create the silvered surface that makes reflection possible. Medieval mirror makers often suffered from what we now know as mercury poisoning, developing tremors, memory problems, and other neurological symptoms. The association between mirrors and sickness wasn't entirely psychological. Were genuine health risks associated with mirror production and maintenance. Catherine knows that keeping William away from his reflection during his illness serves multiple purposes. First, it prevents the psychological reinforcement of his declining appearance. Second, it removes a source of obsessive behavior that might be interfering with his rest and recovery. And third, it demonstrates her active care and protection, providing him with the psychological support of knowing that someone is taking concrete action to help him heal. Medieval people understood that recovery from serious illness required not just physical treatment, but mental and spiritual healing as well. The mirror covering ritual was part of a comprehensive approach to wellness that addressed the patient's entire experience of being sick. By controlling what William could see of himself, Catherine was helping to control what he thought about himself, which in turn influenced how his body responded to treatment. As evening approaches and William rests in his bed, the covered mirror creates a different atmosphere in the room, without the constant reminder of his illness reflected back at him. He can focus on other sensations: the warmth of the fire, the comfort of his blankets, the soothing sounds of normal household activity continuing around him. The absence of his reflection allows his mind to wander away from obsessive self-examination and toward thoughts of healing and recovery. But there's another layer to the mirror: superstition. That reveals medieval understanding of social and environmental factors in health. Mirrors were expensive luxury items, owned primarily by wealthy people who could afford to spend time contemplating their appearance. Medieval observers noticed that excessive self-focus and vanity often seemed to coincide with certain types of physical and mental illness. The wealthy merchants and nobles who owned mirrors were also the people most likely to lead sedentary lifestyles, eat rich foods, and experience the stress-related illnesses that come with managing complex business and social relationships. When medieval people connected mirror gazing with sickness, they were observing a genuine correlation between self-obsession and poor health outcomes. Consider how Catherine's mirror-covering ritual also serves as a form of environmental medicine. By changing the visual landscape of William's recovery space, she's creating an environment that encourages rest, introspection, and healing, rather than self-criticism and anxiety. The covered mirror transforms the room from a place of self-examination into a place of refuge. The psychological benefits of the mirror. Superstition extended beyond individual health to family and community well-being. When Catherine covers William's mirror, she's not just protecting him, she's also protecting herself and other family members from the anxiety and fear that can spread through a household when someone is seriously ill. The ritual provides everyone with a sense that something meaningful is being done to help. Medieval people also understood that mirrors could become focal points for obsessive behavior in people who were already psychologically vulnerable. They observed that individuals suffering from what we might now call body dysmorphic disorder or eating disorders often spent excessive amounts of time studying their reflections, becoming increasingly distressed by what they saw. The mirror superstition provided a socially acceptable way to interrupt these harmful patterns. As William drifts toward sleep in his mirror-free environment, his mind gradually releases its grip on the visual evidence of his illness. Without the constant reinforcement of seeing his pale, wasted reflection, his self-image can begin to shift toward thoughts of recovery and strength. The absence of the mirror creates space for his imagination to picture himself as healthy and whole again. The soft sounds of Catherine moving quietly through the chamber, tending to William's needs without allowing him to catch sight of himself in any reflective surface, create a cocoon of healing intention around his recovery. She understands that helping him heal requires not just medicine and nutrition, but careful management of all the psychological and environmental factors that influence his sense of himself and his potential for recovery. as we prepare to explore our next chapter of medieval wisdom, take a moment to appreciate how the mirror superstition addressed multiple aspects of health and healing simultaneously. It recognized the power of self-image to influence physical well-being, provided a practical intervention for obsessive behaviors, created supportive environments for recovery, and gave families concrete ways to participate in the healing process. The gentle rhythm of William's improved breathing as he relaxes in his reflection-free sanctuary provides our bridge to the next exploration of how medieval people transformed practical health knowledge into protective superstitions that served their communities for generations. The bells of Vespers echo softly across the village as we meet Beatrice, a baker's daughter living in the year 1412. The long day of kneading dough and tending the ovens has left her weary, and as twilight deepens into true darkness, she begins her nightly preparations for sleep. But watch her carefully, dear listeners, as she approaches her simple wooden bed. Beatrice will not, under any circumstances, place her shoes beneath her sleeping place. Instead, she sets them carefully by the door, arranged just so, as if their placement could mean the difference between peaceful rest and terrible misfortune. As you settle deeper into your own comfortable bed tonight, let me share with you the remarkable practical wisdom hidden within this medieval superstition about shoes and sleeping spaces. In Beatrice's world, where homes were often shared with animals, where vermin were constant companions, and where the line between indoor and outdoor living was far more blurred than in our modern experience, the placement of shoes at bedtime was a matter of genuine health and safety. Picture Beatrice's humble home, a single room above her family's bakery, where the warm scent of bread mingles with the earthier smells of daily medieval life. The floor is packed dirt, covered with rushes. The walls are thick stone that hold the day's warmth well into the night. And in one corner stands her bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress and rough woolen blankets. This is her sanctuary, her place of rest and recovery from the day's labor, and she protects it with the careful rituals passed down from her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother. The superstition about shoe placement emerged from centuries of observation about the relationship between footwear, pests, and human health. Beatrice's shoes, like those of most medieval people, are made of leather that has been treated with various substances to make it waterproof and durable. These treatments, while effective for protection, also make the shoes attractive to a variety of creatures that medieval people preferred to keep away from their sleeping spaces. Imagine Beatrice's day. She has walked through the bakery where flour dust settles on every surface, stepped in the courtyard where chickens scratch for grain, visited the market where organic matter in various stages of decomposition creates a rich ecosystem for insects and small animals. Her shoes have collected not just visible dirt, but countless microscopic passengers that could, if given the opportunity, establish themselves in her sleeping area. Medieval people understood that shoes could harbor more than just dirt. They observed that families who kept their shoes near their beds often experienced more problems with fleas, lice, mice, and other unwelcome visitors. While they didn't understand the scientific mechanisms involved, they correctly identified the correlation between shoe placement and pest infestation. In particular, were a constant concern in medieval life. These tiny creatures could carry diseases, including the bubonic plague that had devastated Europe just decades before Beatrice's birth. Medieval people noticed that fleas seemed to travel on clothing and footwear, and that they had a particular affinity for the warm, dark spaces created by shoes. By keeping shoes away from sleeping areas, people could significantly reduce their exposure to flea-borne illnesses. But let's explore another dimension of the shoe superstition that reveals the sophisticated thinking behind this seemingly simple practice. Beatrice places her shoes by the door, not just to keep pests away from her bed, but to create a symbolic and practical boundary between her day world and her night, between her working self and her resting self. Consider how this ritual serves as a form of psychological transition that helps prepare her mind and body for sleep. By removing her shoes and placing them at the threshold, Beatrice is literally and figuratively stepping out of her day and into her night. This physical act signals to her brain that the time for work and activity has ended, and the time for rest and recovery has begun. The placement of shoes by the door also serves a practical security function that medieval people valued highly. In a world where threats could come in the night weather from human intruders, wild animals, or fires, having shoes readily available at the exit point could mean the difference between escape and catastrophe. Beatrice's careful arrangement of her shoes isn't just about pest control. It's about emergency preparedness. Medieval homes were often dark spaces, lit only by candles or firelight, making nighttime navigation treacherous. By always placing her shoes in the same location by the door, Beatrice ensures that she can find them quickly, even in complete darkness. This consistency in placement was so important that families would teach it to children as soon as they were old enough to understand, making it an automatic response that could save lives in dangerous situations. As Beatrice settles into her bed, notice how the absence of shoes creates a cleaner, more peaceful sleeping environment. Without the day's accumulation of dirt, organic matter, and microscopic life forms that cling to footwear, her bed remains a relatively clean sanctuary. The psychological effect of this cleanliness contributes to better sleep quality and a stronger sense of security and well-being. But the shoe superstition also served important social and family functions that helped maintain household harmony and health. In homes where multiple family members shared sleeping spaces, having clear rules about shoe placement prevented disputes and ensured that everyone's sleeping area remained as clean and comfortable as possible. The ritual created a shared standard of behavior that benefited the entire household. Medieval people also understood that shoes could retain odors and moisture that would be unpleasant and potentially unhealthy in sleeping areas. Leather shoes worn all day would absorb sweat, moisture from walking through damp streets, and various odors from the environments their wearers had encountered. Keeping these shoes away from beds helped maintain better air quality in sleeping spaces and prevented the growth of mold and bacteria that thrived in warm, moist environments. Consider how Beatrice's nightly shoe ritual connects to larger patterns of medieval hygiene and health maintenance. Just as she washes her hands and face before sleep, just as she says her prayers and performs other bedtime rituals, the placement of her shoes is part of a comprehensive approach to preparing her body and environment for healthy rest. Superstition also reflects medieval understanding of the importance of creating sacred space around sleep. In a world where dangers were ever present and life was often precarious, the bed represented safety, peace, and divine protection. By keeping the contaminated objects of the day world away from this sacred space, people like Beatrice were protecting not just their physical health, but their spiritual and emotional well-being as well. As the night deepens and Beatrice drifts toward sleep, her shoes sit quietly by the door, ready for tomorrow's journey but safely removed from tonight's rest. The ritual has served its multiple purposes: pest control, emergency preparedness, psychological transition, and the creation of clean, peaceful sleeping space. Her medieval ancestors would be proud of how she has maintained the wisdom they discovered through generations of careful observation and practical experience. The gentle sounds of the bakery settling for the night, the soft creak of cooling ovens, the whisper of settling grain, the distant call of the night watchman create a peaceful soundtrack for Beatrice's rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice the protective rituals that keep her family healthy and safe. But tonight, she can rest secure in the knowledge that she has honored the shoe conspiracy that guards her sleep. As we prepare for our final chapter of medieval wisdom, let the image of Beatrice's carefully placed shoes remind you that sometimes the most practical protection comes from the simplest acts of mindful living, and that the wisdom of our ancestors often reveals itself in the small, daily rituals that create boundaries between safety and danger, rest and work, cleanliness and contamination. Moonlight filters through the narrow window of Margot's cottage as our final medieval guide prepares for her evening rounds. The year is 1429, and Margot serves her village as what people might call a cunning woman, keeper of herbal wisdom who tends to the sick, injured with remedies passed down through generations of women who understood the secret language of plants. Tonight, as every night, she gathers specific herbs by moonlight, whispering to them as she works, believing that plants picked under the moon's influence and spoken to with respect will be more powerful in their healing properties as you rest in the peaceful darkness of your own night. Let me share with you the profound scientific truth hidden within Margot's seemingly mystical practices, the superstition surrounding nighttime herb gathering, lunar timing, and speaking to plants wasn't mere fantasiet, was the result of centuries of careful observation about how plants respond to environmental conditions, how human interaction affects their chemistry, and how timing influences the potency of their healing compounds. Picture Margot moving silently through her garden, a space she has cultivated with the same careful attention that a master craftsman gives to his finest work. Each plant has been chosen for its specific healing properties, positioned to receive the optimal amount of sunlight and water, intended with the kind of daily care that creates thriving, potent medicinal herbs. The garden is arranged according to principles that modern science is only beginning to understand: companion planting that helps herbs develop stronger therapeutic compounds, soil management that maximizes nutrient uptake, and timing practices that ensure harvest at peak potency. The moonlight gathering superstition emerged from observations about plant chemistry that medieval herbalists couldn't explain scientifically but could definitely measure. In terms of healing effectiveness, Margot knows, as her grandmother taught her, that many healing plants are more potent when harvested at night, particularly during certain phases of the moon. What she doesn't know, but what modern science can now explain, is that many plants produce their highest concentrations of therapeutic compounds during nighttime hours as part of their natural circadian rhythms. Consider chamomile, one of the herbs Margot is gathering tonight for a tea to help the baker's wife sleep better. During daylight hours, chamomile plants focus their energy on photosynthesis and growth, but at night, they shift their biochemical processes toward producing secondary metabolites, including the compounds that make chamomile effective as a sedative and anti-anxiety treatment. By harvesting chamomile flowers at night, Margot is capturing them at their most therapeutically potent moment. As Margot moves through her garden, she whispers to each plant before harvesting, explaining what she needs, thanking the plant for its sacrifice, and asking for its cooperation in healing. This practice, which might seem like mere superstition, actually serves several important functions that enhance the quality and effectiveness of her remedies. First, the whispering keeps Margot calm and focused during the harvesting process. Stress and hurried movements can damage delicate plant tissues and reduce the concentration of beneficial compounds. By moving slowly and speaking softly, Margot ensures that she handles each plant with the gentleness necessary to preserve its healing properties. Second, the time spent observing and interacting with each plant allows Margot to assess its condition and readiness for harvest more accurately than if she simply grabbed what she needed quickly. She can notice subtle signs of disease, optimal ripeness, or environmental stress that might affect the plant's therapeutic value. Third, the ritual creates a mindful state that helps Margot remember the specific properties and uses of each herb. The act of speaking to the plants reinforces her knowledge about their healing applications and helps her make better decisions about which plants to use for which patients and conditions. Watch Margot as she approaches a patch of willow bark, whispering her intentions as she carefully strips away the inner bark that contains salicins, the compound that would eventually become the basis for aspirin. She knows that willow bark is most potent in early spring when the sap is rising. But she also knows that bark harvested during the quiet of night, when the tree's energy is focused inward rather than on growing and responding to sunlight, often proves more effective in treating pain and fever. Medieval herbalists, like Margot, developed sophisticated timing systems for plant collection that took into account not just lunar phases, but seasonal changes, weather patterns, and even the time of day when specific compounds reached their peak concentrations. While they attributed these patterns to mystical influences, they were actually observing and utilizing the natural biochemical cycles that govern plant physiology. The lunar timing superstition had particular validity for plants that stored their therapeutic compounds in roots and underground structures. Margot knows to harvest roots like burdock and dandelion during the dark of the moon, when the plant's energy is concentrated below ground. Modern research has confirmed that many root vegetables and medicinal root systems do indeed have higher concentrations of beneficial compounds during dark moon phases, when photosynthesis is reduced and the plant focuses its resources on root development and storage. as Margot carefully places her harvested herbs into her woven basket. She continues her whispered conversations with each plant. But now she's asking them to maintain their potency during storage and preparation. This ongoing dialogue isn't just spiritual practice, it's a form of quality control that keeps her constantly aware of the condition and needs of her medicinal supplies. Consider how Margot's herb practice connects to what we now understand about the placebo effect and the importance of practitioner confidence in healing outcomes. When patients see that their healer has such deep respect and connection with the remedies she provides, they develop greater confidence in the treatment. This psychological boost can significantly enhance the physiological effects of the herbs themselves. Superstition about speaking to plants also encouraged practices that we now know improve the quality of herbal medicines. Margot's constant observation and interaction with her plants means she notices problems early, can adjust growing conditions as needed, and develops an intimate knowledge of each plant's individual characteristics. An optimal harvest timing. Medieval herbalists understood that the effectiveness of plant medicines depended not just on choosing the right plant, but on harvesting it at the right time, in the right way, and with the right intention. The superstitions surrounding herb gathering were actually sophisticated quality control systems that ensured consistent potency and effectiveness in their remedies. As Margot returns to her cottage with her basket of carefully selected, respectfully harvested herbs, she begins the process of preparing them for use. Each herb will be dried, stored, or processed according to specific traditional methods that maximize its therapeutic value. The moonlight gathering was just the first step in a comprehensive system of plant medicine that combined practical knowledge with spiritual practice. Picture Margot working by candlelight, sorting and preparing her herbs while maintaining her quiet dialogue with each plant. She's not just following recipes, she's engaging in a dynamic relationship with her materials that allows her to adjust and customize her remedies based on the specific needs of each patient and the particular qualities of each herb batch. The Herb Whisperer's truth reveals how medieval people transformed their deep observation of natural patterns into practical healing systems that served their communities effectively for centuries. Margot's nighttime gathering rituals ensured that she consistently provided the most potent remedies possible, while her respectful relationship with her plants created the kind of careful, mindful practice that leads to better healing outcomes. As dawn begins to lighten the eastern horizon, and Margot finally settles into her own rest, her cottage filled with the fresh, green scent of healing herbs, we can appreciate how her superstitious practices were actually sophisticated applications of principles that modern science is only beginning to fully understand. The gentle sounds of plants settling in the cooling night air, the soft rustle of drying herbs hanging from Margot's rafters, and the peaceful rhythm of her breathing as she drifts toward sleep provide our final soundtrack in this journey through medieval wisdom. Her herbs rests nearby, gathered with perfect timing and respectful intention, ready to bring healing and comfort to those who need them. May these memories of medieval wisdom guide you into peaceful dreams tonight, dear listeners. We've traveled together through a world where superstitions were actually sophisticated solutions, where practical knowledge wore the disguise of magic, and where our ancestors developed sustainable systems for health and safety that served their communities across generations. Stories remind us that sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in the language of mystery, and sometimes the most practical wisdom emerges from the simple act of paying careful attention to the world around us. If you've drifted along with these gentle tales of salt guardians and iron shields, threshold watchers and mirror wisdom, shoe conspirators and herb whisperers, let me know in the comments below how these medieval insights might find new applications in our modern lives. Until we meet again in the quiet hours of another evening, may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of those who came before us, and may you rest peacefully, knowing that human ingenuity and care have always found ways to protect and heal, even when disguised as the simplest of superstitions. Sweet dreams, friends.